The University of North Dakota is investigating a couple of white students after they allegedly locked a black female student out of her dorm room and then took her phone and used her Snapchat profile in order to post this following image. It shows the students in question with the caption, "Lock the black bitch out."
We've just learned that a racist post to social media creating controversy at the University of North Dakota came from a UND student's cell phone.
Now, the girl didn't even know that they had done this on her Snapchat account until her friends had notified her about it. And one of her friends even posted about this on Facebook. She said the following: "My friend left her phone in her room, and the three kids pictured below took her phone and took the Snapchat picture below. They captioned it, 'Lock the black bitch out.' My friend was not aware that they had done this and didn't even realize they had put this on her Snapchat story until another friend of ours."
For the second time in as many days, a racist Snapchat has been uncovered by co-eds at the University of North Dakota. Latest picture shows 4 white females with blackface and the caption, "Black Lives Matter."
The UND Snapchat picture has drawn a national spotlight on the university to see how they'll react. This comes just a week after 2 Kansas State students were expelled for a racist Snapchat picture in what appears to be blackface with a
President Mark Kennedy says he's appalled at the news. An investigation is underway.
So now the administrators are investigating this and they're trying to figure out what happens. And some of you might think, hey, this isn't that big of a deal. It's not a big story. But it's a little idea of what some people in society have to go through in a place that's not supposed to be harmful to them, in a place that's supposed to be for learning, for fun, for growing. And they're being treated as if they're second-class citizens that deserve to have their property taken. While
dozens of students are calling for a new zero-tolerance policy.
We want a zero-tolerance policy in the book for
My first thought was, I'm wondering how the students who were affected are feeling by it. And I was sad. I was sad for them. And sad for myself in some ways too, because it continues to happen. But I was really concerned about the students who were involved. My first thought was, when I got the news, was, okay, I'm going to get dressed and come to campus. And someone told me, no, we got it under control. You don't need to come to campus. But I wanted to make sure that the students were okay.
I think the saddest part was I wasn't very shocked by it, because we've just seen so much of that type of behavior up here. But it felt like a rush of emotions at the same time. Like, even though I'm not shocked by it, it still felt very heavy. It was a feeling of disappointment, a feeling of being sad that I live in an environment where that is such a normal thing, and also a feeling of anger too, just because it's just so disrespectful. I mean, you know, the Snapchat picture was a picture of a whole bunch of white girls with blackface on, saying Black Lives Matter on the bottom. And you know, even if you don't necessarily agree with the Black Lives Matter movement and you're on the other side of it, we're still talking about people's lives here. And we're talking about a genuine concern that I have, and a lot of other people have, about our lives and our safety. And for you just to turn that into a joke, quote unquote, is what they say. But more so, I view it as, again, like these microaggressions hidden under joke.
When I was in class and Queen texted me and she was like, do you know about this? And then she sent me a snap of the Snapchat incident.
From your story.
Yeah, but I was in class so I couldn't talk, and then she kept calling me, so I had to turn off my phone because she wouldn't leave me alone. And after class, I went to Wilkerson, and our whole group was there, and everybody was like pissed, especially Quinn. She was having a panic attack at the moment, and she was asking me a question. I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't seen this. This is my first knowledge of it, so I don't know what to do or what to say at the moment. And at that moment, they were like mad at me because I wasn't showing any emotion because I was clueless on the situation. So I called the girl who posted the Snapchat video, and she didn't respond to any of my questions. She was basically wondering where was I and why wasn't I coming to her volleyball game. And then...
So you called her,
yeah,
and she picked up?
She picked up, but she wasn't talking about the Snap incident. She was talking about something else.
Dodged your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Queen sent out the message on Facebook and social media, and then she also sent it to our President Stacy of the Student Union, who got the President Kennedy involved in everything.
I was pretty angry just because of what the message said, and also it's just a violation of personal property to take someone's property. I get it, we can joke and photobomb people's phones, but once you bring in someone's race, that is inherently racist to me. And I was really angry. I was upset because she's new to UND. This is a month into school, and that's just not okay. Even if it's not a month into school, it's just not something that anyone should do. And I was personally offended because she was my friend.
Yeah, that one I was definitely more angry, especially because I've seen the person who that was done to around campus, and now I know her too. But it just felt so aggressive because, I mean, the fact of taking somebody's phone and literally locking them out of their room and then posting that on their social media, like where her friends, family members are. It just seemed very, like, I don't know, cruel to me. And also degrading too. I mean, for her just to add the bitch onto there. So I don't know, that was very disturbing for me.
And then I had to come to the union to do a police investigation, evaluation, questions. After that, I had to leave my dorm room, and I stayed a couple nights over at Queen's place.
When I think about all the situations where I've had to deal with something racist on campus, at least I can go back to my room and not deal with that. And just like have a breather, like that's your safe place in a sense. But when events like this happen, like that place has been violated. Like, where does that girl turn to now? Where does she go to find, I don't know, some type of relief to collect herself?
Mentally, I'm not a person to do conflict, so if something happens with me, I just like block everything out and everybody out. And especially when this happened, I was expecting more out of these people because I took them to be my friends, and we all got close. They were the first people that actually started talking to me my first week of college, and they involved me in a lot of activities. So I thought we were close, and for them to do something like that, I just shut down completely.
Yeah, it was shocking to me because it went viral, and then we never heard anything about it. Like, the people weren't actually punished or anything about it, and there was nothing like publicized about what kind of actions were being taken to even like prevent it, or what was going on even in the minds of like the students that were targeted. Like, I don't know, I never saw anything about what they were doing.
The Snapchat incident to me was a prime example of how there's no consequences to students for extremely bad behavior. And using something like the First Amendment as a reason why they're allowed to behave that way in an environment where I'm supposed to feel safe to learn, it's ridiculous to me. Because yes, there's the First Amendment, but there's also, university policies against harassment.
For me personally, I stopped going to my classes because there are some people within the dorm who I do have class with, and they know about me hanging out with those group of girls, and they haven't seen me hang out with them for days now, so they put it together. So I stopped going to classes, and then I started dropping on some of my classwork, and my grades started falling because I couldn't focus on anything because my mind was just blocked with everybody slamming me with, oh, you should press charges, oh, you should do this, oh, you should do that, oh, they need to get punished for what they did, and yada yada.
These recent incidents were a little different for me, just because they're out there, they're very public, and the response, it affected a lot of us, like a lot of my friends and myself, very mentally, where we found that it was really hard to go to class, it was really hard to just concentrate, just because, we deal with this every day, but this almost felt like a direct attack on us.
So if you tell your students that they can go around, harassing people based on their race, and they're allowed to do that because of the First Amendment, how is that supposed to make me feel? It'll make me feel like maybe I don't want to be here.
If someone can take someone's personal property and go ahead and put hateful messages on social media, on the person's social media, and then the school can excuse it under freedom of speech, then what's stopping a different student from doing the same thing? Or keep attacking students of colors or minorities or stuff like that. So I think it's building a climate where students are going to think it's okay to keep doing stuff like this.
Some of the people that actually came up to me and started talking to me made me feel welcome, but the whole school in general and everybody, most of the people that slam everything down saying, oh, it's not racist, and especially the president who's sent out the vast emails saying, oh, this is not racist, and we have to follow the majority who's saying that this doesn't involve racism, doesn't make me feel welcome at the school.
It was really bad my freshman year when I came here. People were saying the N-word left and right, like in front of me. People would say it in rooms before I entered the room, and then when I entered, everybody's like, oh, what's going on? And I would go to parties and things like that, and I would see like Confederate flags just hanging all over the place. And when I walk into the room, people would give me weird looks. So it was like, it was really strange, and it felt like nobody was respecting me as a black man, and the cultural relevancy, or I'm like tripping on my words, but the cultural situation and historical context that flag represents, like with me. So after experiencing just being called the N-word all the time, and having people say it around me, this whole thing with this Confederate flag just really made me feel unwelcomed here.
I remember my first day ever coming to Grand Forks. I came summer of 2014, before my semester started, to kind of figure out housing, and my friend and I weren't even here for like 4 hours when someone like screamed from their pickup truck, "Go back to where you came from," yada yada yada. We were just kind of like, you know, we took a step back because, like I said, we've only been here a few hours, and this is where I was gonna be the next 3 years. So it put me in a mood where I felt like I was gonna experience that every day if I'm experiencing it so quickly.
A guy and I were having a conversation. He strictly told me that I didn't understand English because I was African, so I couldn't understand and read and write English because I was African. That made no sense to me because obviously we're communicating in English, so obviously I can listen to it and I can speak it.
Yeah.
But how do you come to the conclusion that I can't?
One incident, I was at a bar and I got my drink knocked out of my hand by a guy. And the bouncer saw it and came over to us, and I hadn't done anything to provoke it. And I was just upset about it, and the bouncer kicked me out and said that all you black girls have an attitude. So without even listening to my side of the story or asking what had happened.
I was just walking into the facility, a Choice Fitness, and there was this guys in a SUV, and then they screamed at me. They were like, you know, "Fuck Somalians." And I look back, you know, and they're like driving near me, and I look back and I'm just kind of like, are they talking to me? You know, like I look around, I'm the only Somali person walking around.
We had this dog that we just brought into the home, and the dog was a pretty aggressive dog, I would say. Sometimes he would just growl and kind of like bite at people, actually, and had bitten one of my roommates in the past. And one day I was just doing homework in my room, and I ended up stopping and just went to sleep. Then woke up because I heard like this like rattling noise or whatever. It sounded like the keychains of the dog. And I wanted to go out there and like try and shoo the dog away from like the basement area that I was living in my house, because like I said, the dog was aggressive and just unsettled me having him kind of around in that area. But when I flipped on the lights, I saw on the side of the dog was just a big swastika, like marked up on his like white fur, and with a Sharpie. And immediately I was very freaked out, because I was thinking like none of my friends would ever do this, because all my friends I was living with seemed to be very forward and like progressive in that means. But after a while, I just sent a text message saying like, you know, who did this? Is this your idea of some type of joke? Because it's really just not funny. Because it seemed really scary, because instantly, like when I saw that, what I was thinking of was Juba Cafe, which was a cafe that was burnt down after somebody did the Nazi SS sign on the window. They spray painted it. And I can't speak for everyone, but at least for me, when I see those things, I never know how to completely handle it, because it could be one of those situations like Juba Cafe where next thing you know, the entire building's on fire. But that was basically that, man.
You know, I'm a girl and I live alone. I go to school alone, I go grocery shop. I'm alone a lot. And it kind of worries me sometimes that in an environment where I don't know who has, I guess, who dislikes me for whatever reason, and how close are people like that around me. And the fact that I'm by myself a lot, it makes me worried. It also makes my family worried.
It was extremely distracting, and I didn't feel like I could get an education from this university with that type of atmosphere. So I was calling my mom, and I was like, you know what? Like, I don't think this is the right place for me, and I was gonna drop out. I ended up getting a scholarship that made me want to stay, because it covered a good portion of my tuition. But at the end of the day, the atmosphere didn't necessarily change as much.
It kind of makes me feel like maybe I shouldn't even go to the gym by myself, because what would stop those guys to come out of the car and try to harass me?
So it was Intro to Psychology a few semesters ago, and it was in a smaller class setting. There were about 20 students, maybe 30 students. It was taught by a graduate student professor, and one of the class periods we were talking about education. He just came out and said that white people are smarter than black people. He didn't give any explanation why, didn't say anything much else after that. And a lot of times I'm one of the only black people in the class. I was the only black person in this class, and the whole class kind of just like looked at me to see what my reaction would be, and I didn't really know what to say or do, so I just kind of let it go. And then I saw one of my classmates downtown that weekend, and he was like, yeah, did you know that white people are smarter than black people? And I was just like, I didn't know what to say, so I was just like, yeah, apparently. I don't know, I guess.
So you said you reported that incident?
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people actually about it. I've talked to professors, I've talked to deans, and they've all said that they would take action, and I've never like heard anything else about it. So.
If we look historically, right, if we think about, in the early or in the mid 60s when there was the desegregation of communities and schools in particular, and the integration of these schools. So I think that we saw racism then as being really more overt. You saw people using racial epithets, you saw people physically intimidating black folks as they started to integrate into these, predominantly white, primary, secondary schools, as well as in higher education. So I think it was more overt. And so it was more seen, and I think people could connect, the thing that this thing is causing me distress, right? That experiences of racism or going out and trying to protest for rights, that is causing me distress and it's impacting my well-being. And I think over the years that there's been the overtness of racism has gone down, but that covertness of racism has gone up. And as I think, and I would say in the last couple of years, maybe some of that more overt racism is starting to return. But I think that it's hard to measure some of that covert stuff because it becomes like a microaggression, right? It's like a racial microaggression where it is, these, it's been talked about as these daily slights or, things like that. So sometimes people are often left wondering, did that really just happen? Is it about my race? Is it about my gender? Is it maybe they say that just because I'm in this class, or maybe they really weren't talking to me?
There's all these conflicts around my blackness or like my culture, which are offensive things, but they're throwing it into that small category, saying that, oh, it's nothing. Is that little thing? Are you serious? Like, you're gonna say that's racism? It's like, well, yeah, it is. It's these small day-to-day things that are interfering with me just living my life without having to run into these walls that make my race a thing. Like, I just want to live my life and go to school. I mean, I love talking about race and culture and things like that, but I'm talking about situations where it comes up where my race shouldn't have been mentioned, or it shouldn't have been a big determiner of what was going on at that very moment.
You know, it's been talked about as these daily slights or, you know, things like that. So sometimes people are often left wondering, did that really just happen? Is it about my race? Is it about my gender? Is it maybe they say that just because I'm in this class, or maybe they really weren't talking to me? And, you know, maybe if somebody says out loud, well, maybe not everybody in this class should be answering, then the person of color may be thinking, wait, was that to me or not? So somebody could really make it almost seem as if it is not about race.
When a student who's experiencing those things is isolated because of those things, it can really create an environment where that student feels alone, and you can't even. A lot of times, I don't even know if someone's choosing to discriminate against me, what issue they have with me. I don't really know. If someone looks at me wrong, or if someone kind of uses I gave this example that, like, there's a lot of people who sometimes use their body language to, like, inform me of the fact that I'm not wanted. And a lot of times I'm just like, dude, I don't even know which one you have a problem with. Like, I don't even know which issue you have with me, so I just can't try to go out of my way to try to figure it out.
I have more experienced overt things, like, instead of covert. To be quite honest, like, people are pretty upfront about what they feel about things. It's just the being treated differently or the being disrespected part that really throws me off. And I would argue, though, too, that those types of aggressions people are trying to put that into the microaggression category, with this whole movement of political correctness, why people are, like, fighting against that so much. It's like, oh, he just said the N-word. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, that's not really racist. It basically just means bro. It's like, really? No, I don't really think so.
You constantly are thinking about how, like, the perception that you're giving to others and how people are perceiving you at the same time.
I think people are really quick to look for something to be a singularity, as if it just happens one time, so they can easily denounce it and not own it, right? And that's why I think oftentimes now, as it relates to experiences of racism, that people don't talk about institutional racism. They talk about individual, personal racism, because they could say, see, that person did it, and then let's remove that bad person and everybody else is okay. And so they don't make that connection in terms of the historical functioning and existence of racism, whether it be in a small college town or in a large urban area.
That's the big thing about microaggressions. It's just, I have to prove to you that this is, like, not cool and that this is wrong. Like, it should just be obvious, but for some reason it's not up here.
Anytime somebody experiences any negative experience, trauma, or anything like that, what we do know is that although something that's really acute, something that happens and then stops, right? So somebody's house gets broken into, they're in an extreme car accident, it's a very acute and maybe traumatic event, but they may go back to kind of this normal state or normalcy in their lives. With racism, what people have come to realize that racism is chronic. So people they may have these spikes, but it kind of stays up here. So people don't get a chance to go back to baseline in terms of normal functioning. And so people have looked at racism and how it impacts their physical and mental health, right? So looking at racism, that we recognize physically, it contributes to higher blood pressure. It contributes to people reporting more headaches and so that cardiovascular health. Also looking at other parts of kind of physical well-being in terms of being able to get rest and relax. People feeling like they're actually able to kind of come down from that experience. And so with, as I said before, cardiovascular health. Some other kind of measures of cardiovascular or general well-being are negatively impacted on the physiological part. On the psychological aspect of the impact of racism, we know that it's correlation. So it's not causational. We can't say for sure that racism causes this, but there's correlational work that says that racism is there are correlations between higher rates of depression, higher rates of anxiety, lower rates of self-esteem, whether it be kind of individual or collective or group self-esteem. We know that that it impacts behavior as well, right?
It's mentally exhausting. It creates an environment where you try to be mentally tough, so you alienate yourself even more. So you don't feel, it's like, if you're afraid of being rejected, you never ask something. It's like that. Where if you're afraid of being alienated, so you never even try to get involved. I think that it creates an environment like that for a lot of people, where they don't even get involved with activities and groups and fun things that are happening on campus because they don't really feel involved. They don't feel welcomed.
Some studies actually have looked at, a couple studies have looked at kind of racism and college students and how it impacts specifically Black college students. And so one of the things it talks about is that there are higher rates of distress, right? And so psychological distress could be a lot of different things, right? It could be some depressive symptoms, some symptoms associated with anxiety or anxiousness, coping mechanisms. So people may be using substances, but this idea that it impacts, it has there's a negative impact, so that there's greater levels of distress and stress. I was just looking up a few things earlier today, and it really does talk about higher rates of reported depression and anxiety. So we know that, again, there's this correlation, but that there's something is happening. And so then people talk about racial socialization. So what are some of the earlier messages that maybe parents tell their children that may help them, right? Cultural pride messages, or how do you deal with racism? And some of that work says that when people are able to recognize that they have to deal with racism, that they may do a little bit better than those folks who haven't been equipped at all.
That affects that student of color. It affects how they learn. It affects their overall college experience. It affects where they choose to work. It affects their overall, their entire life.
I do think that we're seeing more overt racism starting to reappear, not only in college campuses, but in our society. And people are talking about the toll that it's taking. And I think a good example, looking at Black Lives Matter movement, when people really talked about Black Lives Matter as a means of demonstrating the value and worth of Black lives that need to be considered as equally as any other life. And so the negative backlash and the things that have occurred have really impacted those folks who are just really trying to say, see me for who I am. And so I do think you see some of that. I think we need to continue to measure that. But it's really hard to say to what degree. But I would say it is increasing if I look at some of the more anecdotal and more kind of qualitative pieces of information that are coming out.
So it's a lot for one person. And on top of that, honestly, I'm just trying to be a good student. I'm trying to be a good employee. I'm trying to just get my life together. I'm worrying about the same things. I have deadlines. I have, goals and ambitions and things I'm trying to achieve. And I'm in a pretty rigorous program. So it's just I'm just trying to just be a student, and I can't because there's all these other things that are happening to me that are not in my control, but are affecting me personally. And then you come to class and people only see those things. They only see the differences you have.
Right now we're in a situation where minorities are marginalized, where our opinions don't necessarily matter. Nobody really cares if all the Black people are upset at UND. That doesn't significantly affect the goings on at this university. But when there's more minorities, you can't escape from that. So
I think that they really just need to be upfront with what is happening and address the issues, because it just seems like they're ignoring them and brushing them aside like they don't matter. And I think that if they set the tone that people can get away with this kind of stuff because it doesn't matter, or they can't do anything about it, because I've heard that too, then that just kind of gives people an excuse to continue to act so ignorantly.
I don't think they understand the sociological aspect of the issues of, like, they don't understand the biases that Black people face every day, the prejudices, the microaggressions. They don't understand how a police officer could look at me and you as two different people because of, in two different ways, I should say, because of the color of our skin. And how that might actually affect us because they don't live my life. So they think that you can truly be colorblind and see past it. So people standing in front of the university protesting then just becomes something annoying to them because they don't see this racial issue. They don't even believe there is an issue.
You know, I think that for some students, they may experience racism so often, not that they become immune to it, but I do think that that may be a concern that there may not be much happening, and I think they accept it as maybe everyday life that this will happen, and so they may turn to their peers for support and you know, in terms of being resilient to continue to come to class. But I do think that there are probably many more, as that clothesline and people coming forth during the rally demonstrated, many more instances of racism happening on this campus and in this community than we are aware of.
Don't ignore it because it doesn't affect the majority of your students. You know, I think the university can actually acknowledge what's happening in our country and acknowledge that it's affecting so many different people, and without, and that would make the students feel included if that's acknowledged. Like when the ban happened, you know, if there's anything out there about, you know, if this affects you, if this affects your family, let us know. If teachers said that to students, you know, if you have to go home because this is affecting your family, let us know. That would make a big impact because you'll feel like your problems are the university's problem, instead of feeling like you're by yourself.
I think like this president of the university is doing more than has been done in the past, but I don't think it's nearly enough, because it really is an overturn of everything and a reforming and cultivating a new culture and atmosphere around those types of issues. And people usually want a simple, quick answer of this is how we solve the issue. But for it to do that is to say, how do we solve the issue of racism in America? And that really is a change of the entire atmosphere. And what that looks like is when embracing the culture. And that's not just going to Taco Tuesday and saying it's a Hispanic event. That's about learning about the cultural values, norms that go along with those cultures. That's about when you hire staff members and you ask them about diversity, can they get away with just saying, oh, it's cool, like, oh, I accept that, yeah, diversity is fun, I've been to a couple events? Or are you really looking to see if that person has had exposure to different cultures, or at least a curiosity, or what's really in their heart, and do they feel a compelling drive to support individuals who may experience different type of systematic prejudices or racism, or you can even move it to the challenges that homosexuals face or even women face. So I think you got to hit it from almost every direction, and quite frankly, they're just not doing that.
I think that more needs to be done. So to say is something happening, I would say yes. The university is addressing it. However, I think that there is a lot of room for growth and for more in the more ways that the university can respond. I think we if I were in a position to lead the university, I think one of the first things I would do is name it for what it is. Whether it's at a university, happening at a hospital, mayor of a town, I think we have to name it for what it is. Because when we don't, I think again, like as I mentioned earlier in terms of microaggressions, then we can start to say it as something else. Well, maybe it's about class, maybe it's about maybe it's about level of ability or anything else that can diffuse a discussion around race. So I think we need to name it for what it is. Racism is racism. I don't need to have somebody, as I said, I experienced one of my first experiences with racism was seeing this cross being burned in somebody's yard, but that doesn't mean that other forms of racism are not it. So I think there's a lot of room and growth for the university and for the community in terms of addressing it. And I think that we need to, and no better place than at on a college campus to engage in dialogue and discourse.
And I hope that the university can start to build an environment where all students feel welcome instead of continuing to sweep things under the rug and continuing to excuse behavior like this.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that most students of color here feel totally welcome here?
I can speak for myself. I don't. I can't speak for anybody else, but as a student of color on this campus, I do not feel welcome.
Creating some type of a system where there are consequences for people harassment. When we did the rally, we rallied for a no zero tolerance policy. Implementing something like that is something the university can absolutely do because other universities have done it, and something that would benefit students and help make all incoming students aware and current students aware that this university does not tolerate that type of behavior. Because right now, it seems like the way that the Snapchat incident was handled, that it does tolerate it.
Education is a huge piece of it. And it's not just the racism itself is what I think we should focus on. It's just the cultural experiences, the history that has happened in the past, exploring all that, like why something, like why is it racist? It's not just the act, like, oh, all these people are running around doing this and that's making black people sad. Like that's not the big thing that people need to learn. They need to learn what blackface is, like what it was used to do in the past, and also things like mass incarceration. Why is it not cool or funny to make jokes about black people not having dads and fathers in their lives? A lot of people don't realize that that's a result of systematic racism in our country. And if they knew all those facts, maybe they would have more empathy, sympathy about why people feel so strongly about these things. Because if you don't understand, I don't think you understand that these are can feel like real personal attacks and have that effect to a lot of individuals.
People always talk about how to recruit students of color in campuses like these, but no one really talks about how to keep students of color once they actually come here. You know what I mean? It's easy to attract someone to come to something, offer them a scholarship, yada, yada, yada. They don't really know what they're getting into, they'll come. But once they're here, that's the work the university has to do, is keep students not only complete their education here at UND, but actually stay in Grand Forks, stay in Fargo, stay in North Dakota, work, live here. And I think the university can do a better job.
So I think that right now, if you say in the next 10 years, what does it look like? I think that college campuses have to brace themselves for increased levels of backlash. That I think that's going to be present, which I also think goes along with that then. And we've seen that not just here, but in this past year, numerous universities across the country, more overt forms of racism that will appear. And so I think it takes courageous leadership. That's what I would hope in the next 10 years, where university administrators, presidents are able to really speak truth to these incidents as they occur. That they can really say that this is racism, and not just saying that it's not okay, but that they have an active plan of addressing it. Just like we address the financial need for students, just like we addressed other kind of mental health needs for students. I think that universities and courageous universities will need to make sure they address it, that they are addressing racism that it occurs on campus. And so in the next 10 years, I want to be hopeful. My belief is that those courageous universities and administrators and presidents will step forward in collaboration with students and faculty and staff. They can't do it alone, but I think in collaboration with all the represented entities on campus, that they can address these issues.
Again, the atmosphere is displayed with racism, prejudice, and cultural intolerance. Like, I need a community, a group of people behind me to support me. But what the university can do to do that, again, is what I was talking about with hiring faculty members who understand when I go speak to somebody, they're going to be able to be that support system for me. And also creating a multicultural center that is really a multicultural center instead of downgrading it like they have been doing. I mean, it really feels counterproductive in a sense because we're having all these incidents occurring, but yet instead of feeding into these programs, they've decreased them. And I know we're going through a budget crisis, but at the same time, these programs are essential. I mean, at least that's what the university claims diversity is on their website. So if that's true or not.
I think if nothing else, I think something very small. I think if bystanders can just stand up and say, knock it off, stop, that's not funny. I think that would also have an impact that people are underestimating. Because in some way that somebody else telling that person, if I see sexism and I'm as a male and I turn to another male and say, hey, that's not cool, knock it off. That we know as it relates to sexual assault that bystanders can play a role, right? And we know the same thing, I believe the same thing can happen as it relates to dealing with instances of racism. So I do think, I think courageous universities, they will experience it. They're not going to be immune to it, but I think they can address it. I think they can do it proactively and at times reactively, but I think that they can, with a lot of intentionality and inclusion of the full community, I think they can address the racism as it comes forward.
Grant Forest is not a horrible place. I actually enjoyed my time here. Aside from all the things that I was talking about, you know, it has its negatives, but it also has its positives. I've met amazing people, kind people, people who know me by first name basis whenever I would go get my Caribou coffee. You know, professors that are kind and welcoming, and nonprofit organizations that are created here in this town to help New Americans. There are amazing things about this town, and there are a lot of improvements that can happen. And I think those improvements will only happen if we focus on how to keep the diverse population that we bring into the school, how to keep them in the town, in the city. And I think a great way to do that would be to have advisors and more people of color advisors, more professors of color, you know, just create a place where you can see yourself long term and that you feel welcomed and you can see you're raising your kids here and things like that. And it's not a short-term process, it's a long-term process, but I think it's doable.